Hi, welcome to the show. And as usual, I've got someone exciting that I'm excited to have you meet. And he's come to town recently, and maybe you don't know him very well. And if you do know him, you're going to get to know him better, and it's going to be worth your time. And hopefully, you're going to learn a lot more about the city of McMinnville because I have with me today the McMinnville city manager, Jeff Towery.
Hi, Ken. How are you today?
Very good. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, well, thanks for moving to our city. That's was that a big jump for you?
Well, it was. It was a big jump when we started looking for a new place to land. It felt like we were being uprooted because we'd lived in Springfield for about 16 years. Mm-hmm. My daughter was born there. My son had been there since he was about 4 months old. So it was really the only place the kids knew. And it was really uncomfortable to think about leaving there because we hadn't really thought that that was going to happen. And when it was clear that it was going to happen, when we found McMinnville and McMinnville found us, it felt less like being uprooted and more like being transplanted because we realized that we were coming to this really cool place where people would welcome us and care for us, and it has the same kind of sense of place that is important to our family. And so it was a little bit rocky. It's tough to move school-aged kids and tough to leave a place where you've been for a long time, and it's been a great move. We really are thrilled to be here.
So your son is now a senior.
He's a senior at Mac High, right?
So he moved in the middle of his junior year.
Yeah, we started the kids in the middle of the school year. That was a tough transition. We got a lot of advice. Most of the advice was start your kids in school as soon as they can, because if you show up in the summer, they're not going to know anybody, and they'll be miserable. And so we decided that was what we would do, and we started the kids here in school in early March, and they finished out the school year, and they made some friends, and they were less lonely this summer than if they hadn't met anybody.
What did they find to connect with in town? What kind of filled there was a big void. They just left their life.
Yeah.
And so what kind of things filled it for them?
Well, so our son, for him, it was athletics and music. He's a talented string musician, and the orchestra program here is a little bit different than he experienced at Thurston, but he loves to play, and he's really good, and he made some friends immediately in that orchestra class. And he's been a lacrosse player for several years, and there's no lacrosse program here, but he was recruited by the track coach to go out for track and field down in Thurston this year, and he was already kind of leaning that way anyway. So as strong as the track program is here, he dove into that. He had a really good track season. He had a lot of fun and met some really great folks both on the team and on the coaching staff. So I think for him it was athletics and the music that really helped him make the transition. And we also let him spend time with his friends in Springfield, and we had a couple of his buddies come stay with us for a while this summer, and he got a chance to go back and forth. So it was sort of a gradual transition. For our daughter, we kind of call her our potted plant. She blooms wherever she lands, and so it was a little bit easier for her, but it was a challenging transition for her too. She made friends right away, and a number of her friends ended up being in the neighborhood where we live, and so she probably did more sleepovers and had more sleepover guests and spent more time kind of out and about than our son did, but they both ultimately made the transition well.
Okay, well, I'm glad that has gone well, and you've found roots here yourself.
Absolutely.
I think that from what I was at the City Club yesterday, the State of the City address, and the mayor had a lot of good things to say about you.
He was
I think
very kind.
wise was one of the things
that
you said.
That was a little embarrassing and a little humbling.
Well, let's go back into what maybe went into all that wisdom. Tell us about your careers. How you've moved about the country quite a bit.
Yeah, I was an Air Force brat when I was a kid. My dad was in the Air Force until I was in junior high school, or I guess late in grade school when he retired. And so we moved all over the country. We kind of settled in the Rocky Mountain region when I was late in grade school, and our family moved to a small town in central Montana when I was in junior high. And so that became home. I describe Montana as my first home state. We lived there for about 10 years. I went to high school and college there.
So a small town that you didn't name because you didn't think we would recognize it.
So White Sulphur Springs, Montana.
White Sulphur. Now, a lot of people out there go, of course I know White Sulphur Springs,
some
but
people,
myself, no.
Yeah, you have to be pretty intentional because it's sort of if you drive from Livingston to Great Falls, you have to drive through White Sulphur Springs, but that's sort sort of the only place you'll be going to go through White Sulphur. It's way up in the mountains. It's a mile high.
Wow.
Tiny little town. I think there were 1,300 people in town when I graduated from high school. The mill closed, and there is about 850, 900 who live there now. So
About
it's a
the
tiny little town, and it's a county seat. I mean, it's a small rural county, lots of ranches.
County seat.
Yeah, so maybe I'm going to guess there's maybe 2,000 people in the whole county.
Oh,
So it's way up in the mountains and fairly isolated. When I was a kid, you had to drive about 40 or 50 miles to get to some place that was bigger. There were some smaller places in between, but it was an interesting place to grow up for sure.
About the size of Yamhill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but not anywhere close to any place like McMinnville for sure.
So a country kid, how did you make the transition to being a
Well, I
a city guy?
I knew I didn't want to work in the mill because everybody that I knew that worked in a mill had hands that sort of looked like this.
Oh,
I
my
mean, it's
gosh.
dangerous work, and
Yeah.
my family was in logging, and they all were bunged up, and it was a hard life and good for some folks, but didn't really seem to fit me. So I just knew I wanted to go to college. I didn't know what I was going to do for sure, and gravitated towards local government when I was probably a junior in college. It turned out that my academic advisor and one of my professors got elected to the city commission in Bozeman, Montana, and he became the mayor. And he got me an internship at the city of Bozeman when I was a junior in college, and that was how I caught the bug.
So you got your start in the field you're still in, right, in college?
Yeah, pretty much. I had a couple of internships in college. I worked in a legislative session for the Montana League of Cities and Towns, which is the Montana version of the League of Oregon Cities. And I tracked bills, and I wrote testimony, and I worked with mayors and finance directors and city managers and legislators from around the state. It was a pretty cool, exciting way to spend a winter term in Montana.
I would call it an auspicious start.
Well, it was fun.
Yeah.
And I really caught the bug. That's where I really figured out what it was sort of like to be a city manager, and I gravitated to that and selected a graduate school where I could really better prepare myself to enter the profession.
And where'd you go?
So I went to Syracuse University in upstate New York. So a long, long ways away. Lots of snow and lots of wind, and not quite as cold as Montana, but still a pretty harsh winter environment. And landed in Coos Bay, Oregon, right out of college, right out of grad school. Classmate of mine went to school at Oregon State for a year, and his wife was from Salem. And so he knew a little bit about Oregon, and he knew that my former wife and I wanted to go back to the West. We didn't really know where we were going to go. Montana is a cool place to grow up, but there's only about 7 or 8 city managers in the entire state. So it's not a very populated place, and lots of small towns. So I just by happenstance found out about this entry-level job in Coos Bay and got hired there and started my career. And
As a city manager?
No. I started as what was called an assistant to the city manager, and that sort of meant you did everything that needed to be done. And I back in those days, it was before personal computers, and so I entered by key punch every single line item for every single department in the city's budget. So every number that went into the computer, I entered into the computer myself and had to check it with a tin key, had to have the paper tape to make sure the numbers balanced and all that sort of thing. So I basically started from the ground up, and I'd been there about 2 years, and my boss got terminated, and the council made me the interim city manager. And there was sort of what I'd call a political rock fight that went on. The council was pretty split on a number of issues, including the termination of the previous manager. And so I ended up being the city manager in an interim status for almost a year, until a new manager was hired. And then I got a promotion to assistant, and not long after that, I graduated to be a city manager in Cottage Grove and was there for 6.5, 7 years, and then went off to upstate New York to be a city manager in Auburn.
Okay, Syracuse, Oregon.
Yeah, so it's a long and winding road, and by then I was single, and went to upstate New York, and ended up meeting Doris, who that's a whole nother show. I'll just tell you that.
Okay.
I was the
Doris?
my wife Doris. So she was the publisher of the local newspaper, and I was the city manager, and that made for an interesting romantic relationship. And we actually have newspaper articles having been written about us, so it was pretty fun, sort of fun. maybe not as fun as, maybe more fun for me than for her. She didn't appreciate it quite as much. I said, now you know what it's like being a public figure. So anyway, so a couple of years in upstate New York. Her job, actually, we decided we wanted to get to Oregon. She'd never been here before, but I wanted to come back. Her job got us to Oregon through Montana, strangely enough. She was in newspapers for a number of years and was a publisher in Helena, Montana, which is about an hour and a half from where I grew up. And so we lived there for a couple of years. And I started my own consulting firm at that point in my career, trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and worked for a variety of clients, mostly government clients, but had some private sector clients too.
Consulting and how to manage.
So I did a bunch of things. I helped with strategic planning and goal setting. I did research and white papers. I was served as an interim department head for the city of Helena for about 7 months. So I did a variety of things. I did transit studies. I did revenue analysis. So I worked for several cities and state agencies as clients while we were in Montana. And then Doris's career moved us back to the Willamette Valley, and she became, this is one of those weird full circle thing. She became the publisher of the Cottage Grove newspaper, where I had been the city manager before. And she was also publisher of the Springfield News. So she had two newspapers at the same time. And that's how we landed in Springfield. And I continued my consulting for another year or so. That's about the time our son was born. And so I was a stay-at-home dad, part-time consultant for about a year. And then started working at Lane County and worked in a couple of positions there for about 7 years before moving on to the city of Springfield as their assistant city manager, and was there for a little over 9 years. And now here in McMinnville, back as a city manager.
9 years in Springfield.
Yes.
As
the assistant city manager.
Having been a manager in a couple of other towns before that. So I can see maybe why Mayor Hill was saying wise. It sounds like you've had a lot of opportunity to have a lot of experience. And when you were, as a consultant, you were diving into things in maybe really depth that focusing on a certain client, a certain project, like you said, a white paper, more than when you were working as a manager, having a lot of different responsibilities. You probably had a lot of opportunity to, philosophize about how things should be, and you get your kind of find out who you are and bring a vision to things.
Right. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot more about myself personally and professionally. Well, I'd like to think I've learned about myself the whole way along, as opposed to just for that few years in time. But it did give me a different perspective. And one of the things I learned about myself is I really feel like I'm at my best when I'm part of a team. And so while there's something liberating about being a consultant, because you get to choose what work you do. If you don't like the work, or if you don't like the people, or if you just don't feel like it's a good match, you can say no. You can move on to something else. And that's kind of cool. I mean, that's a fun part. That was a fun part of the job, being able to just do the work that I wanted to do and that I felt I was particularly good at. But I missed being in a team environment. I really did. And I feel like I'm at my best when I can work with other people, when I can be collaborative, when I can bounce ideas off of folks and they can do the same with me. And so that's really what led me back into the career, was knowing that I was better suited to work in an organization and be part of a team as opposed to sort of a free agent.
Well, thanks for helping us get to know you. I mean, this is great. We love to love our city managers.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
We name buildings after them, right?
I understand
Kent
that.
Taylor.
Yeah. Every time I walk by the building, I think, hey, I know that guy.
And Joe Dancer Park.
Yeah. I knew Joe too, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Yeah, so quick story. So I knew who Joe Dancer was because when I started my career, it was about the time Joe was retiring, but he was much loved in the profession, not just in this place, but around the state. He was very well regarded. And I had people talk to me about this Joe Dancer guy who was really important and really a good fellow and a fine manager. And I knew a guy named Rick Dancer in Coos Bay who was a television reporter. And I said, I know sometimes you guys use stage names, but are you any relation to Joe Dancer? And he said, yeah, Joe's my uncle. And Rick's now retired. He was a KEZI anchor down in Eugene, Springfield for a long time. And so I've known Rick off and on for a big chunk of my life. And so I knew who Joe was. I knew some of his family. And the first time I met Joe was actually at a conference in Fort Worth, Texas. And I was getting off the bus and I looked up and this fellow got off the bus next to me and his name badge said Joe Dancer, McMinnville, Oregon. So the first time I met Joe, we were 1,500 miles away or something like that.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm sure that you're going to become part of that great company.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the city.
Sure.
Strategic plan.
Yes.
That's something you have worked on before. You have some
It is.
expertise there. And did you come into this process after it was already started, or did you say, hey, we need a strategic plan? How did you come to it?
So we don't have a strategic plan here, but the council every year does some really thoughtful work around goal setting and has for a very long time. And one of the things the council did during goal setting this year, which was about the time I was hired, they were doing some of that work before I was technically on board, but we were working our way through the due diligence process. So we pretty much knew I was going to be here. And the council identified an interest in doing a strategic plan as part of their goal setting session this year. So I inherited that work, happy to do it. And had it not been part of the council's goal setting, it's one of the first things I would have asked the council to consider, because I think it's really important. Those council goals are an important component of a strategic plan, but it's a complex business and a complicated world that we're in, and no organization has all the capacity and all the resources it needs. And so figuring out, what are the key things that are really important that can have long range, high level impacts on a community and an organization, that's really important. And that's part of what the strategic plan is supposed to do, is to help us figure out what are those visionary, aspirational things we want to do as an organization and as a community.
What are the bullet points on a strategic plan? What are the chapter headings?
So you need to figure out where you are in the world. It's the wonky term is a SWOT analysis. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that's the pluses and the minuses, the pros and cons, both internally and externally, that an organization or a community faces. You need to have goals, which the council has worked on. You need to have a sense of what your community's values are, which we have. But we haven't identified what are those 2 or 3 or 4 really high-level strategies that we want to pursue. And what's our long-term vision? What do we want to be like when we grow up, so to speak? And so those are the pieces that we're really going to spend time working on. Is what are those strategic initiatives? What's that long-term aspiration for the community? And then what's the work that we have to do to try to get there?
Well, I know you're going to spend a lot of time filling out those different headlines, but maybe we can just touch on the obvious ones. Strengths. We want to leverage off our strengths. So
Sure.
What do you see maybe as an example of a couple of those?
So I think McMinnville has a really clear sense of itself. I mean, there's a kind of a core belief in the importance of McMinnville. There are a lot of people who've been here for a long time. There are a lot of people who choose to be here, who haven't been here for a long time. You got a great mix. The downtown is just one of the flat out most remarkable downtowns in the entire state. It really is. We're in the heart of wine country, which is really a growing and significant industry in this state. We're close to Portland. We've got access to the beach, access to the mountains, access to the city. We're a standalone community. We're a county seat, so we're the hub of some really important social services that occur. So there's a lot of great things about McMinnville.
That's a nice list. Weaknesses.
So I think while McMinnville has grown a lot over the last 25 or 30 years, hasn't grown very much in the last few. We've sort of gotten a little bit stagnant. If you look at our population, it hasn't changed very much in the last few years. And that's not good, bad, or indifferent. But if there's a value in growing the community, we're not doing that right now. Things are sort of stable in terms of population. Where they're not stable is in terms of income. We lag income. We're substantially below the median in our county and in the state, and so we don't have the kind of income that we'd like to have as a community. So figuring out how to manage growth, how to manage expectations around growth, and also help to drive up the income in the community are a couple of areas where we really have to wrestle with and figure out how it is we're going to do that and what it is we want to do.
And I know there's I don't know if you want to characterize it a weakness, but you're certainly aware of our housing shortage for what we call affordable housing, but
Right.
just any kind of housing. Rentals, starter houses, apartments are just, people are desperate.
Yeah, the rental market's really tight. Those first family homes or what's commonly called workforce housing. So
Workforce
folks
housing.
who are working hourly jobs and their ability to afford a home and move into it is pretty limited. Part of that is driven by the economy, where Oregon is recovering substantially, but there's still a hangover, if you will, from the 2008 recession and the real estate bubble popping all over the state. We haven't regained the sort of growth that we were seeing prior to that, and one of our constraints here is land. We don't have a lot of buildable land right now, and so there's relatively little of it, and there's less of an economic incentive to build affordable housing if you can sell higher end housing, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it creates, like you said, an imbalance. And I think the council recognized that a couple of years ago when they established their affordable housing task force and are looking at ways to try to encourage affordable housing. In fact, we had on the agenda last night an affordable housing development of 16 units, and we haven't seen a 16-unit affordable housing development for a very long time in McMinnville. So we've got some incentives in place to try to encourage that sort of development, and we've got some apartment and other affordable housing developments that are kind of in the works, in the planning. So we're going to see a little bit more of that, but that's certainly a need in the community.
Opportunities
Well, I think
with that.
so. One of those opportunities is that if we are able to demonstrate a demand and be able to appropriately incentivize, we will see a better mix of housing provided in the community over time.
Threats?
So, some of the threats, and threats is an external. So, what's something that someone can do to us that we can't control? Well, we can't control the state economy. We can't control the national economy. The ups and downs that happen either in Oregon or in the region or in the country are really out of our control. And anytime there's uncertainty, that would be a threat that a community would have to try to figure out how do we insulate ourselves? Is there a way to be prepared for that sort of thing? And part of that exercise is identifying, what are those specific strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that would face McMinnville. So, I can guess at what some of those are right now, having been here about 7 months, but, I need to get the experience and the wisdom of the folks in the community and the organization to help us really sort through all that.
A threat that comes to mind is the Cascadia subduction zone.
Sure.
Possibility of an event.
Sure.
Does the city think about that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, wildfires. I mean, we've seen that all around us, and we haven't had too many right close to us, but we've been inundated with smoke for sure. So, yeah, certainly there are natural events that would constitute threats, and we can try to prepare for those. We are working with our regional partners around emergency planning and resiliency planning. Those are related but different things. One is, so how do you deal with the emergency, and the other is how do you recover from it when it happens, and you have to be able to do both. So you have to be able to respond in the moment and then get things back online afterwards. And so that's an area where we're spending some time as well.
So strategic plan sounds like it's a big piece of what you're up to now. It's not day-to-day immediate managing of all of the departments, right? That's your job?
Well, that happens too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It all gets to happen. Yeah.
Name the departments if.
So we've got police, fire, community development, planning, parks and recreation, library, information services, and we've got finance department, and we call it an admin department or a city attorney municipal court, and HR functions are sort of lumped in together with our admin. And if I missed somebody, I'm going to hear about it before the interview.
I think
over. I think I got it. Though.
Community development.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
So community development. That's if you say community development in another place, you might get a different reaction. It's really our utilities, so our wastewater, our street system, our traffic signals, the maintenance of our parks and of our buildings. And so it's that infrastructure component of the community. And so so except for the construction of parks, which happens in a little bit different way, the physical assets of the community, our buildings, our streets, our sewers, a lot of our lights, not all of our lights, because some of those are MAC water and light. That's the group that designs, plans for, replaces, maintains those physical infrastructure pieces.
Well, what you were saying there, talking about our physical pieces, you brought some pictures along with you.
I did,
Let's
yeah.
see if we can
You
bring
wanna look at
those up. Kind of what I called glamour shots.
Yeah.
What have we got? That's a beautiful construction. What
Yeah,
is
so
it?
that's part of the 2014 wastewater treatment plant expansion. That's been ready for winter, it looks like to me,
Very
or maybe
good.
a spring shower. I think that was a local bicycling event out at Evergreen. That's our city hall, the White House. That looks like probably an early fall picture based on the leaves, right?
Now, is City Hall serving, is it meeting the needs?
So it's an old building. I think it was built in the 20s. There's a springtime shot of the building. We kind of affectionately call it the White House. So city manager's office, municipal court, finance, and admin, we're all sort of clumped in there. So it's, it's kind of tight quarters, and it's an old house, and so it's got some needs, but it's got some real charm as well.
Do people talk about, oh, we need a new City Hall?
Sometimes, yeah,
But-
sometimes we do, but we've got to go through that. That's a community conversation that we have to have, and we haven't had that. That's the Dragon Play structure at City Park, right beside the library and the aquatic center. There's our downtown in the spring, of course. Downtown in the summer looks like we have planter baskets almost from the same spot. And I'm not sure where that construction is, but obviously somebody wanted to get their picture taken with the equipment, and the crews paused so they could do that.
Lots of laterals going in.
Yeah,
This area.
yeah, and that looks like an overlay project. So some new pavement going down there. And that's a shot of our library, our award-winning library, as a matter of fact, is recognized by the Downtown Association
I go
for
by
its
there now,
contribution to public art.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's torn up right now. Is the statue, is it still in place?
No, we had to move that statue. It'll be replaced in a different spot, but the Second Street and the intersections of Adams and Baker work that are going on right now have caused that to be moved.
I'm excited about
And that's
that.
one of our canine and one of our officers. I regret I don't know the dog's name. And that's one of our glamour shots, if you will. Looks like a flowering plum in bloom behind the clock.
I took a picture almost identical to that.
And there's the cherry blossoms, right? Is that
yeah.
cherry or apple? That's probably.
That city clock with
Yeah.
McMinnville on it is also in McMinnville, Tennessee.
Oh, is
the
it
same
really?
clock
They've got
is
the
there.
same
Yeah,
clock. Oh, that's funny.
I was on a trip
there
around
we
the
are.
country this summer,
Oh, that's funny.
and
I didn't know that.
I spent a little time in McMinnville.
So tiny story, our domain name now for our email on our website is McMinnvilleOregon.gov, G-O-V.
Okay.
One of the reasons is that before we changed that, if you just typed McMinnville into the Google machine, you'd usually get McMinnville, Tennessee. So we wanted it to be McMinnville, Oregon. And that's one of the reasons Portland, Oregon they've got the same kind of domain structure because Portland, Maine will pop up if you just type Portland in some places.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's see. You came to town and you were pleasantly surprised, I'm
Sure.
sure, because we just are so proud. But what did you notice? Tell us why you like us.
So I like us, and I'm part of us now.
Oh,
by the way.
yes.
I haven't been here long, but it's my place now too. So people are genuinely kind here, and I will make the distinction between polite and kind. They're two different things, and they're related. But the genuine kindness that we have received from people who know us a little or don't know us at all is really humbling and really touching. And it's happened to everybody in the family. It hasn't just happened to the guy who's the city manager. My wife has had that experience. Our kids have had that experience. And the genuine caring and kindness is really a remarkable and kind of undersold thing about McMinnville that I didn't have any reason to expect because I've known kind places and kind people before, but it's really a dominant trait in this place.
Well, Jeff, it's amazing, but our time's almost up. But I wanted to give you a platform for maybe something you want to say to residents of McMinnville on how they can participate in the growth, the improvement, the well-being of our city. How would you invite folks?
Well, a lot of people do already. I mean, as you heard yesterday, we've got something like 1,300 people who volunteer at the city, and that's as infrequent as somebody picking up litter in a park for 1 hour once a year to our city council and our volunteer firefighters who put in dozens and dozens and dozens of hours a year serving the community. So there's a lot of opportunity for folks to volunteer, either committees or commissions or task forces, but specific work. If you love the library, go ask for Jenny Berg and say, hey, is there something I can do to volunteer in the library? If you love our Parks and Rec, call Susan Muir and say, hey, I'd like to do something for one of our parks or one of our recreation facilities. We've got opportunities in nearly every department, in nearly every way that you could think of. Anybody who's got some expertise and some drive and some initiative and who loves this place and wants to make it even a little bit better will have that chance to do it.
All right. And if they come into City Hall, they might get a chance to meet you.
They will. If they ask
Okay.
for me and I'm around, I'd be happy to say hi.
Okay. Well, Jeff, it's been a very quick half hour, but thanks so much for coming. It's great to get to know you better, and we'll have you back to talk more about what's going on in the city.
Please do. I'd love to do that.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much.